build 100 to 300 single family homes, and then we will stabilize and rent them to families, younger families, usually in the Southeast. In the South is that a lot of the municipalities are a little bit easier to deal with. So as you know, with the development, the speed with which you can build is so important. There was this moment in time where I was delusional. And I respectfully say that to you, whoever you are that's listening to this. There will be a time where you're going to have to ignore people like me and people like Eugene. As trite as it sounds, trusting your instinct is a major part of this business. Like, God does in a way help those who help themselves, but that's only clear to me now, right? That's only clear to me in that. But you get like a little sappy when you see the little kid playing on your playground that costs you 20 grand.
Andy McMullen, welcome to Real Estate Development Land to Legacy.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Gene.
Awesome. So we talk a lot about real estate development, about real estate investments, and I see that you are with Legacy Acquisitions, and you do, as I understand, lots of different kinds of real estate transactions, including development. Tell me about the types of deals that you do.
Yeah, sure. So I would say that the last 5 years, we focused really on built to rent development. So we'll go into communities in the Southeast United States. I'm here in San Diego. We kind of own some units here, but try not to work as diligently here. They make it much more difficult for us here in California. So we're focusing on the Southeast, where we'll build 100 to 300 single family homes, and then we will stabilize and rent them to families, younger families, usually in the Southeast. So that's kind of what the focus, the last 5 years. So I've been in the game, gosh, Eugene, about 25 years, longer than that, almost, gosh, now let's pass the 25 years. But I started off on the brokerage side in kind of the West LA air market in California, and then kind of started buying some apartment buildings in Central, Southern California, some in Texas, Carolinas, Kentucky.
Okay, and so what is a build to rent product?
Yeah, so if you can kind of think about it as a multifamily project, just pulled apart, like a horizontal multifamily project. So they're built in kind of one single community, about 100 to 300 homes. Think of like a amenitized apartment building where you have your pool and your walking trails and dog yoga and all those things. Now you've got, instead of somebody above you and below you, you've got this detached single family, might be 1,200, might be 2,400 square feet, where the landlord, owner, is doing all of the kind of maintenance and maybe cutting your grass, but you still got your barbecue in your backyard and your space and a little bit of privacy. So that's kind of the trend's been going on for maybe 5, 10 years ago. I mean, kind of even heard after the great financial crisis, a lot of, larger institutions would buy scattered sites, right? They'd buy a lot of different projects across the, county, and they try to manage them. Somebody obviously a lot smarter than me figured out, why don't we just build a bunch, manage them all, scale, benefit from economies of scale, and then we can stabilize them quicker. So that's become, a trend over the last few years. It's probably still in the early innings, honestly, Eugene. I mean, when you think about the amount of money and institutional money that's in multifamily, for instance, where maybe 45 to 55% of that ownership is controlled by Wall Street. It's a really small percentage that controls the single family built to rent market. So that's why we like it.
Okay, interesting. So they're basically single family homes, right?
Yep.
There are no units attached together, right?
That's
There are no
correct. I mean, we do
duplexes or
have some
townhomes.
projects where we might have a townhome or two, or we might have an area circumscribed just maybe seniors or veterans that might be more attached. But for the most part, our projects are detached. So they're all kind of separate by quite a few feet on each side. And so we can build like 8 to 9 homes on an acre of land.
Okay, so there's still, decent size front yard, backyard, right? So it feels like a home,
That's right, and
standalone
that's
house.
part of the draw
Okay.
is, what we probably couldn't have predicted is that we benefited from this triangle, which is, one, you've kinda got this low supply, right? It makes sense that because there's a low supply, there's a lot of people that need housing, and so the rents have gone up a little bit just in general in a lot of different markets. But then what we probably couldn't have predicted was that you've got, you know, mortgages now that are 1,000, even 1,200 in some cases, higher than, now you're basically in a community, even those that could afford to buy a home may in a rental community. And then the other thing that we probably should have predicted, but we didn't, that's been kind of a lucky benefit, is the kind of seniors that are living and maybe active longer. So maybe they're coming out of empty nest rather than just going out to their next apartment or, next kind of stop before senior living. They like to have their own, you know, private space with their own backyard, just having us cut the grass. So that's kind of been the trend.
Okay. So that makes perfect sense. The demand compared to a multifamily, like a true apartment building.
Yeah.
Do the properties have to be zoned specifically for these types of communities, or do you just take regular single family zoning?
Yeah. So we in many cases, Uh, and I know, don't you hate getting that depends? Now that you're a podcast host, right? I'm sure you hate depends. You probably used it as a developer all the time. And you're like, oh, just give me the rule of thumb. But the rule of thumb would be that yes, you can usually buy there's apartment living that the built to rent can kind of fit in as opposed to the built for sale, which is kind of a different animal. So when you're doing all of your approvals throughout the political process, neighborhood council and city council and all the approval councils, usually you're able to get that within the apartment zoning. In some cases, we might have to do a PUD where it's one single project, a PUD, plan or unit development, where it's built as one single community, but it's detached housing. In others, we've gone and we just have individual plats. So you might have 150 homes, all individually platted, that you would not have to create an HOA or any additional kind of association in order to sell them. If you want to sell them in groups of 10 or 20 or 30, you could do that.
Okay, so in theory, if you've got a large parcel, you could technically keep it as one legal parcel and build whatever number of homes that would fit on it, right?
That's right. And I think part of the draw for us has been in the South is that a lot of the municipalities are a little bit easier to deal with. So, as you know, with the development, the speed with which you can build is so important. So, the land is certainly a little less expensive. The unit cost pretty close, although labor in some of the areas of the South might be a little bit less expensive. But if you pick the right market that's already got growth, already under supply, and you got municipalities that really want you there, now you've got an opportunity to go in there, show your plans, get them approved pretty quickly, and through the entitlement process, which is obviously the riskiest part of the development game. So if we can strip that part out before we take that out to investors, that's a much, much easier sell, right?
Yeah, I was running numbers on I guess, basically a built to rent development up here in the Pacific Northwest around Seattle area. I could not get them to pencil. I would look at the land acquisition. I would look at construction costs. I would look at the rental rates of how much we could rent these houses out, cost of capital, and it simply did not pencil. So, with our
Yeah.
typical capital stack of roughly 30% equity, 70% debt, I'm getting to the finished product and I'm like, if I refinance it to some sort of a permanent debt, I would never be able to, the rent would never cover the debt service.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yes, I know that they would appreciate. And if I had the cash to hold it for 5 years, 10 years, whatever, then they'll probably double or triple in value. There's no doubt about it. But as far as the holding cost, it, it did make sense for me as a commercial investment. And there's a ton of individual retail investors that buy homes. And especially right now when interest rates have risen and people refinanced, years ago or a couple years ago for these low rates, nobody wants to sell. So everybody's renting. So there's a ton of rental properties all of a sudden on the market from these individual renters, but none of them would make sense at today's interest rates. How do you get them to pencil? How do you get it to work?
Yeah. So you're mostly Washington, I think, right? In the Northeast?
Mostly Washington,
Yeah.
Western Washington, Seattle area.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Every deal, as you know, kind of have its own DNA. But I think maybe if there's an unfair advantage that we're seeing in the costs is one, we're fully integrated on the construction side. So certainly there's some cost savings there where we're able to kind of really understand. The other thing is that we're building very, very simple kind of every project, every unit has the same interiors with different exteriors, different elevations. So the Bob the Builder kind of put one in, you've got 5 at 10 in a week. So there's an efficiency on the speed which can kind of make it pencil. But certainly, you know, when we first started doing some of these projects, 2018, 2019, our partners had been doing it maybe 5 years before. We saw lumber go up, to 1,000 foot per board was at 2,000 per 1,000 foot, but it was, from 600 or 400 up to 1,000, 2,000. So you saw insurance costs go up. So every market kind of has to have quite a bit of room in order for it to make sense. So I think what people on the on the left coast, and I'm there as well, have to consider is that the speed with which you can build and get through the entitlement process is maybe a little bit faster than it would take to do something over here. And most people don't expect that the rents, you're able to get those kinds of rents. Like if we're building, it's costing us 120, 115 a unit, 150,000 to 220,000 for the unit build. And we're still able to get 18 to 1850 in rents. Usually, and you can build fast. It's a lot different than, some of the areas on the West Coast where your total unit costs, including the marketing, including the resale, including all of the entitlement, including a big part of that, the time, that's a totally different model. But
Okay, so
I wish deals have changed quite a bit.
so speed, cost of construction, those are the two main factors from what I heard that allow you to make these deals pencil, right?
Yeah, I mean, and obviously how reductive that is, right? Because the development process for every step along the way. There's how are you managing the team? What's your cost of capital? What's your relationships with the banks, the institutional banks, the community banks? There's just so many different factors. So yes, if we're kind of being reductive in this sense of trying to synthesize this information for folks, yeah, that's how I think we've got maybe an unfair advantage is the kind
Mhm.
of cost to build and the timing.
Okay, so if I want to develop a build to rent community, what do I need to know?
Well, I think you've got to be a little bit more specific there, Eugene. If you're asking the day before we start or the day after, we're trying to take the councilman out to dinner and promise him that we're not going to turn the development next to his neighborhood into a light tech project. You got to kind of give me a little bit more clarity as to what the entitlement process, the horizontal process, the unit process. Otherwise, I'll go on forever. So give me something a little more specific.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So, a lot of the conversations that I have with the property owners go something like this. I've got a piece of land about 5 acres. I want to develop it. I haven't really done it before. I'm seeing the neighbor over there doing something. I think they're built to rent. I don't know. They're small cookie cutter homes. I
Yeah.
would like to do something like that. Where do I start?
Yeah. I love this question because by the time I kind of ask my list of questions, that they're kind of like, all right, well, I'll talk to somebody else. Right. So first off is you got your lender set up. You got your balance sheet. Are you going to be able to convince, even if you do decide that you're going to be crazy enough to do this on your own without help? And I don't want to insult people. Of course, they're going to have some help, but do you have those 2 or 3 people that if this project goes sideways, the wherewithal in order to kind of cover the costs that can get you to that next phase, right? So that's one thing. Do you have a great brokerage team that not only is good at what they do, but they're good for you at what they do? Do you have people in the mayor's office that will kind of help you with maybe their public-private partnerships? So a lot of people that do decide to do this have some of those elements, and that's why they'll probably become a good partner. But rarely are they able to do what Eugene does in the sense that he's tried this road and it had a couple of roadblocks. And so then he had to go and detour this way and this way. And he's kind of accumulated all of these like neurons of what can work and what doesn't, this myelin that's built up that that particular person doesn't yet know what they don't know. And it's kind of like I always just ask them, if you were to do this parenting thing again, would you do it the same way that you did when you first started? Of course not. You would do a lot of things different. Maybe you say, I would cherish all of it and I love all of it, but you know that it's impossible for you to turn this nothing into something without failing in some way.
Right. No two siblings look alike or act alike for various reasons, right? We frequently have this conversation because a lot of times I divide the groups of people that I talk to in two different camps. One camp says, oh, this is incredibly difficult. I would never develop anything myself. The other camp says, how hard can it be? I'll hire an architect, I'll hire a contractor, and we'll get it built. I've been doing it for over 20 years now. We've seen uh, a lot of problems, a lot of issues, and that's why it's always an interesting conversation, and it's a fun process educating these property owners that we typically partner with when we develop properties.
There was this moment in time where I was delusional. And I respectfully say that to you, whoever you are that's listening to this, there will be a time where you're going to have to ignore people like me and people like Eugene. Because Eugene, you wouldn't be doing this for 20 years if in some way you weren't delusional from the time that you were doing, smaller properties to where you're doing larger properties, to the people that you hired, to the contractors, to the contracts that you created, to the banks that you utilize to kind of building out your network. All of that stuff is over time. You're kind of some version of a fraud, right? And then you're some version of a fraud that you wake up that next day, you're like, oh, I'm gonna do this. So there's gotta be some of that, but why not be that person that's delusional and bring in some other kind of seasoned veterans that can kind of help you from making those same mistakes. And that's much easier said than done. But it's the truth, right? You think about the successful projects that you have, they're not as good as you are. They're only as good as, oh my gosh, I remember when Jim saved us from this issue, or Bill had the incredible conversation with the mayor about this issue. It's usually your team that comes up with these things that are, oh man, was it because of me? Yeah.
Right. Well, and a lot of times we learn things by fixing problems, and every experience comes out of overcoming some issues or some situations. So that brings me to the question I love asking. Can you share, Andy, can you share a horror story, something that went horribly wrong? And what lessons did that teach you?
Yeah. I mean, and again, these things kind of like from the outsider, they sound like, oh my gosh, I don't know how I would deal with this. But as you know, being in this and close to it, somehow it just has a way of working itself out. If you're still in the game, then in some way you've succeeded, right? You've probably lost some money along the way. You just had some failures. So if I'm to highlight one failure, people are going to be like, oh, I'll never do that. But there will be something different that you'll experience. Can you get up and do that over again? But I mean, I just think of we were developing projects in Venice Beach during 2007, 2008. And so I recall what it was like there when finance just completely shut down. And I remember, getting calls from banks and saying, hey, look, the loan modification stuff, that's no longer a thing. We're selling that sucker. Sorry. There's nothing you can do. Right. So, there was things like that that happened. I even think about as recent as 2 years ago, we had a great lending partner. And I still would do business with them today. But they're controlled by Wall Street. And so Wall Street says, hey, remember what happened with Silicon Valley Bank and how they didn't have any of their regulations in place? I think we need to really make sure that we're a lot more stringent on the development funds that we're giving folks. So They basically, I had already signed the loan, my guarantee, everything. The next day they called me and they said, "Hey, sorry, we got to move you down from, I think it was like 75 down to 65% LTC. So you got to go out and raise another $2-3 million in a couple of days." Now, there's a version of these stories where people are like, that was it for me. I've decided I've had enough. Luckily, I had other strong partners that had been through some things like this. Luckily, I had enough kind of bumps and bruises that knowing that this is not the end. But what if, Eugene, that was our first deal, right? That's our first foray into development or real estate experience. That might be the end. So I think about all of those things only to say that there is a lot of you deciding to trust your instincts. You're going to hear things from other people, experts like Eugene, people that have failed like I have failed, and will tell you something. But only you kind of have that nuanced information about what works, what doesn't work, what this broker particularly told me, what I understand about my unfair advantage in this particular market, with this particular politician, etc. Only you have that information. As trite as it sounds, trusting your instinct is a major part of this business.
Right. So, to your example, how does one go about all of a sudden raising 10% capital when they got permits approved, they're ready to be picked up, and they're ready to
Well,
go there
luckily in
ahead
this
with it?
case, we own the land. So we want to sign on the loan in order to start some of our horizontal infrastructure has been already utilized with our capital and some investors' capital. If I don't get this money, then I got to give investors back the capital that we have not yet utilized and take all of our capital that we've got to pay the people that have already invested in this horizontal project. When I say horizontal, listeners, I think you guys all know streets, roads, utilities, all the kind of infrastructure. And so when you asked how, that's the thing about this business is that if you were to ask how some of these things came together, it's like 20 different things, right? It's some luck. It's some like just pounding the phones. It's some, wow, I had no idea that my friend Bill knew this guy who knew this guy who knew that guy that could kind of help bridge this gap for us quickly. I had no idea that my investor who was in this first deal was like, yeah, man, I got some more. So that's kind of the thing is like, God does in a way help those who help themselves, but that's only clear to me now, right? That's only clear to me in this inflection point. It's not clear to me at that time. We were able to kind of find the capital that we needed for that loan to cost, close on the loan with changing the kind of what they call schedule of values, which is how you associate what costs you would in the infrastructure in order to get your loan draws, kind of adjust the loan draw schedule a little bit, and then bring in some more of our own capital to bridge the gap. So all of those things kind of had to occur before we could close. I had never experienced that as long as I had been in the business where I'd actually signed a loan and then been called, right? But what am I going to do? Am I going to go call Wall Street and tell them, hey, this guy with his $30 million project really feels like he was wronged in some way. Can we help him out? So
Right.
that's just kind of the way that this thing goes sometimes.
So, how does a successful project look to you? How would you or what would a successful project be? Is it
Yeah.
what do you look at? Certain returns, and what are they, or community impact? What are the benchmarks that you typically measure?
Yeah. And I'm older now. I got to see the real estate lines on my face. So like I get a lot more sappy now, Eugene. So the community impact for me, that part is really big. So, I'll be going out to one of our projects here in a couple of weeks and we'll be having a holiday event. And, as kind of ridiculous as some of these things sound when you're talking about big, big dollar amounts and these huge 60-foot pipes and you get these excavators and cranes and you're kind of like overseeing all this, but you get like a little sappy when you see the little kid playing on your playground that costs you 20 grand. It kind of puts things in perspective, right? Because these are the homes that these people are living in, and you had some small part in working with the community, and you kind of have the backstory of how this all came together. That they're never going to know who we are and they couldn't care less. But it is kind of rewarding in that sense to see something come together. Kind of like when you're a kid and you get your first puzzle done or your first director set or whatever that is. There's just something that's joyful about it. And then of course if there's a scoreboard, usually that scoreboard is, did I get my investor this IRR? Considering, if you're a football team, you consider the injuries, right? So the injuries might be, yeah, in this development project, we had the cost of lumber go up 4 times and insurance costs go up 4 times. And we had the GFC and the whole financial crisis, but we still got a 12 or 14% IRR. That's a win, right? That's a win. That's not a win. The projections that we saw, but we got people their money back plus some. So those are the kinds of things that I consider when we're talking about what would be a win, what would be a loss.
Got it. And so the typical time horizon of an investment, how long is it?
So usually for us, it's about, I like to do the 36 to 40 months and then a tail for stabilization. So if you were just to break it down, usually we might buy the land or we might auction the land. That's a small piece of it. Usually we try to entitle the land before. So we'll auction it, then entitle it, and then buy it. That's typically the way that we try to work that in the South so that we can save a little. And usually that's our money. And then the horizontal piece would be streets, roads, utilities. That's usually, I like to put like an 18-month. Some cases we can go really, really fast. In some cases, you got, municipality tells you got to change out your septic, or, in Alabama, they've got their own utility service. And then you got the consolidated government and the consolidated, all of those guys have to be on the site at the same time to sign off on things. So you might have delays there. And then if you're building 15 a month or so, 1 to 2 years on the construction, followed by the stabilization of the lease up. With built to rent, one thing that's nice about Eugene is that you can rent them almost as immediately as they're got the C of O. So that's a little bit different than the apartments. You can lease up a little quicker.
Got it. So when you, in 3.5, 4 years, you got your buildings built, you're starting to rent them out and people are moving in, how soon do the investors get their money back?
So usually it depends on the stages. In some cases, we'll have early investors that will get taken out by later investors on the horizontal side, which would be taken out by investors on the unit build. So their returns would be less certainly than the guys on the very early stages. Typically, it'd be a capital event of some sort that would, in development, it's very hard to, until you stabilize, to be giving investors a return. But I think that the overall kind of wealth accumulation of 4 or 5 points higher on either the IRR and certainly even higher than that on the AAR, on the average annual return, usually keeps people interested in these deals, so long as we've stripped out a lot of the risk on the front end on the entitlement. So usually it's in that 3 to 4 year range when you're converting the kind of construction loan. You got a capital event, you've got some rents coming in, and now you're able to get people some of their capital back.
Got it.
Usually some of these built to rent projects we're going to hold longer, pay out investors and hold longer, but usually it's in that 5 to 7 years.
Got it. And so can you share what types of returns the early investors get versus the ones that get in later?
Underwritten it, if it was 2 years ago, maybe it was going to be, now it's might be a 22, right? And then maybe the guys that are coming in the unit builds might be in the 18 or 19. So if you're a multifamily today, you might be in that 14% range, for a project that may have been an 18%, a couple years ago. So I think if
Mhm.
people are thinking about it that way, these are just depends rule of thumb, as important
Sure.
as depends diaper, that you're not calling me up and say, hey, you told me, Andy. But I think just in general, people are looking at deals, as long as you're seeing that conservative part of that 2 years ago, you should be really wary, I think, of seeing a deal that has the same kind of IRRs that you did 2 years ago. Now, that could change. The Fed just dropped interest rates by 50 points, and maybe we'll start to see a sea change over the next couple of years. But for right now, I think that's where it is.
Excellent. Anything else, Andy, that you would like to cover?
I think that we've got some resources if people are interested, Eugene, and on our site, legacyacquisitions.com. Know that we both had quite a bit of help in our careers. So I love to be that for folks that are thinking about this kind of crazy endeavor that we chose to do with our life, whether that's multifamily investing or development itself. Feel free to catch me through there. You can get on our list and set up a call and love to talk with you.